Thanks, Susie. We're here at the afternoon session. Welcome. Thank you for coming back. We're going to be talking about the international ETD landscape, some research data and best practices. And we've adjusted the technology, so we hope things will be a little easier on your eyes this afternoon. I'm Gail McMillan. I'm the Director of Scholarly Communication at Virginia Tech, otherwise known as Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. You can see why we say Virginia Tech. I've been involved with ETDs for about 20 years, and I've had the honor of speaking at many of these ETD conferences. Most recently, I talked about the digital preservation and the meta-archive cooperative. I've also talked about the NDLTD and their sound collaboration for digital preservation strategy. And I've recently talked about the surveys we've done of journal editors and press directors and about their attitudes and policies towards electronic theses and dissertations. But today, I'm here to talk about sharing the results of our first baseline study of ETD programs internationally. After me, you're going to be hearing from James McDonald, who is going to talk about the findings of his survey, adapted from the one that I used, when he surveyed the American International Consortium of Academic Libraries, which he conducted during his 2-year contract as the Web Services Librarian at the American University of Sharjah near Dubai. In early September, he will be returning to his previous position as the Digital Initiatives Librarian at the University of Northern British Columbia. James is keenly interested in the intersection of scholarship and innovative technology, and has been involved in open source software development for the management of ETDs. And our wrap-up speaker will be Matt Schultz. If you were in the workshop this morning, that was Matt. He'll be telling you about the work accomplished during a 3-year grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services on the lifecycle management of ETDs. He'll be sharing various modular and open source curation tools for ETD programs. Matt is the program manager for the meta-archive cooperative, an international distributed digital preservation network. He graduated with a master's in science, Master of Science in Information in 2009 from the University of Michigan School of Information. Matt is also the project manager for another federally funded grant, federally funded U.S. research projects focusing on the preservation of digital newspapers. So you can see there's a lot of overlap in the things that Matt and James and I have done. So we're looking forward to sharing our projects with you, and trying to do the technology, and it's not flashing at you. Do you miss that? Okay, good. So the baseline study of ETDs. When I was at a project meeting for this grant that Matt's going to tell you about, Martin Halbert, who's the dean of the library at the University of North Texas, and I were bemoaning the fact that there had not been a general survey of ETD programs around the world to just get some basic data about these programs. And so he and I said, well, let's just do it. And we hope that we will do this survey every 2 years. And so I'd like to report to you some of the data that we've discovered in our first survey. And I'd like you to think during the talk if there are other questions that we should have asked, or maybe we should have asked our questions differently, because we'd like to improve on the next issue of this survey. We set out to create a survey that would collect as much helpful information as possible about programs, program planning, collection, content and size, collection management, and access in particular. We used a free survey software called Qualtrics, and we asked about 30 multiple choice, short answer, yes, no, open-ended questions. And we distributed the survey through various listservs and announcements, social media, to stakeholder communities involved in ETD management. So we sent a notice that the survey was available to the Council of Graduate Schools, to the Association of College and Research Libraries, to the Network Digital Library of Thesis and Dissertation listservs, and to the Coalition for Networked Information. We also disseminated it to attendees of the most recent ETD conferences, both the international and American ones. So we hope that we gathered quite a wide audience, as you'll see from this map. We have not a bad coverage of the world, considering it's the first survey of this kind. It was completed by 199 people, but we had to eliminate some of the surveys because they were incomplete, or we got more than one survey from the same institution. So we ended up with 169 usable surveys. And it was completed by people who self-identified themselves in this way. There were 15% of them were ETD librarians, 31% were repository managers, 13% were deans and administrators, and 16% were graduate school personnel. We also learned that 35% of the respondents were members of the Network Digital Library of Theses and Dissertations. So I hope that many of you were in this pool of people that responded to the survey, and if you weren't, I hope you'll look for this survey when we do it again, probably around next March of 2015. So what did we ask? Well, of course we asked, do you have an ETD program? And 93% of our survey respondents said yes, and interestingly enough, 2 said no, and we don't plan to have one. They still wanted to take the survey. 6% of our respondents said no, they didn't have a program at the time, but they were planning one during the next 1 to 3 years. So we asked those people, and we asked that small group of 6% a few questions. One of them was, what do you hope to gain with your ETD program? And not surprisingly, most of them mentioned access. They wanted to make their ETDs accessible. And several of them specifically said open access, but I think we're all talking about the same thing here. We also asked the ones that were in the planning stages what would help them to implement their ETD programs. And so you can see from this that they wanted guidance documents, online materials, instructional workshops. They wanted to attend an ETD conference. They wanted to meet other people who had ETD programs, and they wanted support from a national organization. When they had a chance to comment, they added that they would like an institutional directive for their ETD program, and that they would like a workshop on how to get buy-in from outside the library. So I think that's not surprising. Our survey did not ask many, I would say, political questions about this, but many of the comments really reflected that that's the tough part of an ETD program. We attempted to determine those in different stages of ETD program implementation and how they would prioritize these things that would help them with get their program started. So I think you can see that here from the graph that displays. So we also asked the survey respondents to describe their ETD programs in terms of mandatory, the whole gamut from mandatory to optional submissions. And 70% made inclusion mandatory for all of the ETD or all of the PhD students and all applicable master's programs. So there are probably institutions like Virginia Tech where we offer master's programs, some of which require a thesis and some of which don't. Only 11% of the respondents have departmental or unit mandates, but not institution-wide mandates for ETD programs. And it was interesting that 13% of them also accept undergraduate theses. Among those with existing ETD programs, we asked about the content coverage of those programs. And 65%, you can see, responded that their institution requires just born digital ETDs. 38% said my institution is currently in the process of digitizing theses and dissertations created prior to the implementation of their ETD repository. And a slightly smaller number said my institution requires born digital ETDs and print copies. So they haven't quite made the transition yet. 18% said my institution is currently digitizing theses and dissertations, and 9% have completely digitized all of their theses and dissertations. Not a large number, but I don't think any of us are surprised about that. The survey asked how institutions manage their ETD collections. And on your left, you see that about 2/3 responded that they had campus repositories. 13% reported that their ETD collections were managed by an external vendor. and an external state-based repository met the needs of a small percent of about 18%, or 8%, I'm sorry. Of those institutions with their ETDs in a campus repository, that's 66%. Not surprisingly, 90% of those are overseen by their libraries. The survey respondents indicated that their institution used well-known repository software, DSpace being the most popular, with 43%. The bPress Digital Commons that was mentioned at Carnegie Mellon and locally developed software were the distant seconds at 12% each, followed by Content DM and ETD DB with just 8% of the survey respondents. Once we get this demographic data out of the way, there'll be some interesting, really interesting things, I hope. So we asked about file formats, and it helped us, fill in this picture of the ETD landscape and the digital repositories. In response to what formats were accepted for ETDs, the vast majority accept PDFs, not surprising, but 25% accepted any file format. And I know Virginia Tech is one of those. We call it being format agnostic. We'll take anything. The slide shows a more specific breakdown of the file formats. And I think one of the next survey, we want to distinguish, especially after hearing Gabrielle's presentation, we want to distinguish between ETDs and their supplementary material so that we can see if there's one file format that's more dominant in the accompanying materials, such as data sets and multimedia objects. Now, if you can kind of remember what you're seeing here, many of these, or some of these, are not very good preservation in terms of preservation standards. There's some proprietary file formats listed. And so I thought I would share this slide with you from the IMLS ETD Lifecycle Management Guide, which shows this is what some of the authoring software is, which is, of course, often proprietary, but how it might be migrated to other formats that are more preservation friendly. It's one of those things you can see in the guidelines for lifecycle management. And interesting, there was one respondent that mentioned EPUB, which is the open access standard for books that publishers are using, but only one institution mentioned that. So the graduate school personnel are most likely to approve ETD formatting, while the library is primarily responsible for maintaining the ETDs. I thought it was a little bit interesting that only 86% of the libraries manage the ETDs, but 90% of them manage the repositories. So maybe those two questions need to be asked differently. It's not much difference in terms of a percentage there, but still. So we wanted to address the question of issues, and we asked how ETDs are measured at the survey respondents' institution. Nearly 40% gather statistics from downloaded ETDs, but less than 1/3 capture activities through their web access logs. Now, I think we maybe didn't ask that question quite the way we should have, or maybe they interpret it differently, but access logs are generally recording the activity. Whether it's being reported to the people who might use it in the ETD repository, I think, is a different issue. And about the same number, 1/3 captures number reported, do not report ETD usage statistics. The open-ended comments that accompanied this question, through them we learned that DSpace repository statistics and Google Analytics are the most frequently cited. This was a question that I was, probably the main person wanted to know the results of this. But I thought it was really interesting because I did a preservation survey in 2008, and I was shocked. I was just shocked that 3/4 of the institutions had no preservation strategy. And it was so gratifying to see 5 years later that it's almost flipped. They have a preservation strategy. Now, I think the next survey needs to ask a little bit more about what that strategy is or how that strategy is being implemented. Hopefully it's not just a work plan, but it's been implemented. But that's a good change in 5 years. So now we're getting to the good stuff, I think. Are your ETDs publicly available? So 39% of the institutions reported that their ETDs are unrestricted. 58% reported that some of them were publicly accessible. And just a few institutions, 3%, did not make any of their ETDs publicly available. According to the 2013 survey data, ETDs are generally accessible worldwide, with 4 institutions among our respondents reporting that they do not make any of their ETDs publicly available. I looked at these, sometimes I looked at these from an American point of view. I wanted to know what was common in my country, and so I said my country and all of the other countries. And one statistic that stood out to me was that over half of the international institutions, I should say non-US institutions, responded to this survey that their ETD collections are publicly available, while only 1/3 in the US are. That is, half of the international, half of the non-US institutions make their ETDs publicly available, but only 1/3 of the US do. So I think that's something we definitely need to work on in the US. And I'd like to do a few audience polls at this time. So how many of you are from institutions where all of your ETDs are publicly available? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, now. No, ETDs, we're just talking about electronic theses and dissertations, are all publicly available. Would you raise your hands again? 1, 2. No, publicly available. Only things that are publicly available. Open access. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. How many of you make some of your ETDs publicly available? 24. I'm going to say 20. Yes, some are publicly available, some are embargoed, some are university-only access. Okay. Who does not make any of their ETDs publicly available? Peter, do you have something to say? Oh, good. We'll let you talk later. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So of course we want to know why. Why have you made decisions about your university's ETDs? And this first slide tells us the reasons for having just local access. Just the home university is providing access to your ETDs. So these are from the open comments. These weren't yes or no, or these weren't comments where you could agree or disagree with. These are the open comments, and so I have grouped them into these categories, but they fell quite easily into these categories. I didn't have to make them up.
Gail, for that slide, are you referring to Born Digital, not
Yes.
digitized?
We are referring to ETDs. We didn't distinguish between Born Digital and digitized, just ETDs.
So the copyright is a non-thing, which I think is a reason for a lot of
Well, you can say publishing concerns addresses copyright, but that isn't the way they described it in their comments. If everybody had said copyright, I would have had a category for copyright. This is what they said. They had publishing concerns. That was the largest one. They had patent concerns. They had author requests. An author request means that there's no good reason, just the author asked for it to be restricted. And then the confidential and sensitive information, and this is again where the non-US and the US institutions differ. This is more likely to be a reason given from institutions outside of the US. And I don't know what that says, but that was one of the findings there. So are there other reasons? I know, Gail, you mentioned copyright. Are there other, if we ask this question again, should we give them these choices and let them select? Or should we leave it open-ended? Or should we give them a copyright concern option? Are there other concerns that you have about why ETDs are limited, Peter?
Going back a little while historically, but maybe it's biased. It used to be understood in the UK that the thesis was ownership by the author, the student, and by the university. and therefore the question about whether the author had to be consulted before something was made available. Now, that was an historic position. The question is whether that now has been abolished because somebody's told the student that you have to agree this as part of your doctoral program.
So maybe we need to ask the question, who owns the copyright, and then see if it's shared between, if it's the student, if it's shared, and then what decisions they make.
I'll give you the view from a Pro Vice Chancellor research at a regional university. We're absolutely clear the student actually has virtually no rights in this whatsoever.
Really? Oh, that is
If you want a doctorate from this university, you sign up to making it open access.
Okay.
That is the university's policy, and it should be the policy of every university. Doctorates should be public documents. You cannot hide
Are they immediate?
behind any of these things here, apart from possibly the first two. And we will give embargoes around confidentiality, sensitivity, and patent commercial concerns. Author requests, what does that mean?
That just
Publishing concerns, what does that mean? No,
Publishing
sorry.
concerns means they are concerned that they won't be able to publish an article or a book from
Well,
their ETD if it's
If
open
anybody
if
can
it's available.
demonstrate to me that that's actually the case, and they've as yet failed to do so, then we might listen to it. But that's not. But what do you want? Do you want to publish something, or do you want a PhD thesis? They're not the same thing. And if you want a doctorate, you shouldn't then hide behind making it available.
So are your ETDs immediately open access, or is there a delay?
He's being normative. I mean, you're being normative saying what ought to happen from one university, whereas this survey needs to be empirical in the sense that there are different universities that have different policies. Yeah, so I think you have to allow other people to be wrong.
I just like to make question, what happened with creative writing theses? Are they not allowed to keep the copyright? Do they have, is the university the owner of that work?
No, we do not own the copyright. The point is they want to have a piece of paper saying they have a PhD from this university, and as such they have to accept certain conditions. You can't have your cake and eat it. You can't have a PhD and expect to control that. That's not what a PhD is about. If you want to go out and write a book and have a commercial contract, fine. Go ahead and do that.
Okay.
But
we
I
need
won't
to,
give you a doctorate.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I need to get through my presentation because we have two others that are coming, and then we'll have question and answers afterwards. We should have plenty of time. So the other question was not about just restricting access to your university, but do you embargo your theses and dissertations? Do you allow embargoes? So you can see the breakdown here. Some have an embargo, some don't allow embargoes, and at one institution or two, they are all embargoed. And this is another question that we asked about the length of time, but we didn't break the time periods down. It was kind of like less than a year, more than a year. That doesn't tell us what we really want to know. We want to know if it's more than a year. Is it a million years? Is it 5 years? Or some rational breakdown there. So can I see your hands about those of you that, no, never mind. We're going to move on. Sorry. I feel like we got some good responses with the last one. So we want to know the reasons for embargoing, and lo and behold, they aren't much different from the limiting access point of view, except that there were many more expressions. So just over half, had concerns about being able to publish, and that's why they selected embargoes. Now, patent concerns, I thought patent concerns would definitely be the embargo, not the limited access, but that's the way the comments fell out. And again, confidential and sensitive information was listed. So I'm just about to finish. I do promise we'll have time for questions later, and we can come back and address some of these issues. At the end of our 30 questions, or 28 questions, we allowed people to just give us some general comments. And there was, they were all over the place. Some of them wanted to go back again and mention embargoes. Let's see, 26% actually of the survey comments had to do with embargoes, 11% mentioned ProQuest, and 5% mentioned digitizing ETDs. I think their comments, as I mentioned earlier, addressed some of the more political aspects of ETDs rather than just kind of the cold hard facts that we were trying to gather. And lastly, we asked about this next survey and what should we ask, and these are some of the comments that we got here. And I think I have time for you. Are there other questions that you think we should have asked? Susan.
I think there's a big difference between a very strict embargo where, say, a research committee or a vice principal lets, the odd one or two be embargoed for a very specific reason, versus universities where the students can just casually say, oh, I don't want mine to be made available. So I think it might be worth splitting that into...
So we want to know if they have a good reason for embargoing, or
yeah, and if you're talking about a tiny percentage that have had senior management approval to be embargoed versus just a casual author wish for it
author
to be
request.
embargoed.
Okay. Sarah?
Hi, Gail. That's really helpful and very interesting statistics.
Thanks.
I wondered whether you had been able to do any analysis by country or region. I get the feeling that it's pretty US heavy, and some of the statistics probably don't necessarily reflect the situation in the individual regions. So, for example, you had one slide, how are ETDs managed? And I don't know whether I wrote the figures down, but I think you said 66% of respondents use an institutional repository and 15% use a commercial solution. I would think that in Europe, or definitely in the UK, those figures don't ring true at all.
Okay.
And it would be really a lot of work,
Okay.
but really interesting to see some geographic
Okay,
analysis as well.
that's a really good point. I will go back and do that. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I've taken up more than my allotted time, I'm sure, but thank you for your participation. In conclusion, I'd just like to say we hope that we've begun to remedy the shallow depths of statistical data available about ETDs. And as I said, it's our goal to repeat this survey every 2 years and to post the results broadly so that in easily accessible open access repositories. So you'll definitely be able to find it at the NDLTD website. And we really appreciate those of you that responded to the survey. I guess, can I see a show of hands of anyone here who responded to this survey? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Not very many. We'll do a better job. Like I said, we did send it to previous conference participants. Are many of you here for the first time? Yes, okay. Oh, that's great that you're here. You will definitely be notified about the next survey. Okay, and our next presenter, thank you very much, will be James McDonald, and he will tell you about his survey.